Episode 2. Episode 2 starts 1 month after the incident in the motel, with Sean helping Daniel train his power.
Awesome.
We discover that they have found an abandoned house in the woods where they plan to spend the winter, and I already have to pause here. I have to address my issue with the narrative of the story. Let's start with a digression. Are you familiar with the technique called Chekhov's gun? It states that every element present in the story must be important, otherwise it shouldn't be there. Classic example. If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there. We have an example in the game as well. First time you see Daniel in the first episode, you get to know he loves Choco Crisps. Later, you find a locked car with Choco Crisp in it. You may or may not steal it for your brother, but that influences his morality. If you steal it, he will learn that stealing is okay. Now, obviously, such a principle can work in a theater, where you are limited in the scene size, so you can use only the objects which will play part in the story. Although, to be fair, in a theater you probably don't have enough budget to include other items even if you wanted to. But in this interactive game, with fairly large locations, you will have a ton of objects to show, and obviously, they all cannot be important to the story. So in order to keep your players' attention, you have to highlight those which are going to be important. This is called Chekhov's gun, or more generally, foreshadowing. The game uses these techniques well in certain places. Daniel liking mushroom before stealing it, Steven's crooked cabinet, showing Meryl's money safe. But the game also uses foreshadowing somewhat bizarrely at times. For example, notice Jacob in episodes 3 and 4. He's present, but the game treats him as an unimportant character, hides him even by having Meryl constantly forgetting his name. Jacob doesn't seem important, but he will be. That is not an issue by itself, but it becomes an issue when the situation is reversed. The game makes character or object seemingly important and then doesn't follow up on that. You could call this loose ends. Things seemingly have importance, but will not contribute to how the story turns out, will be abandoned. You could also call this plot promises, because the way the story is told suggests, or promises, that the plot will move in that direction. Loose ends are not always a bad tool. A good example is Sean's interest in Jen in the beginning, Lila trying to set them up, planning to go to the party, and Sean carrying a bong and a condom in the inventory as a result. None of it played any role other than to tell to the player, oh, plans are cancelled. Like in a fairy tale. A princess is supposed to go to the ball in the evening and choose her husband, the future king. But oh no! Evil wizard kidnapped her. There will be no ball. That is okay. Jen was never meant to be nothing more than a name. But you cannot overuse this technique. You cannot just highlight different objects and characters to the player, thus suggesting their importance, and then make them fade away without mentioning them again, or utilizing them in a meaningful manner. For example, your inventory and money never matters. I considered especially money a good concept, and I think it is a real pity it got abandoned. I will continue to point out these loose ends and plot promises in other episodes, but to list some. Sean is an accomplished runner, but he never uses that skill, even though he is on the run the entire game, chasing a better future. He likes sketching, but it is used just as a minigame, a gimmick, which doesn't influence the story, very much unlike in Life is Strange 1, where photography was an integral part and motif of the entire game. Claw marks in the woods in episode 1, small but an intriguing object. Chris's relation to his father in episode 2, there was an entire minigame to set that up, no payoff or resolution.
See you around. Sure.
Knife throwing practice in episode 3. Characters never use it later in the game, even though it could present an interesting situation, especially after Sean loses depth perception.
Blam!
Sean's relation to hippies, Finn or Cassidy. Missing people posters in episode 3. While small, still intriguing topic. Betraying Meryl with possible revenge of Big Joe. Lisbeth's revenge if she is alive, or Nicholas's if not, and other. A good example of foreshadowing was meeting Cassidy and Finn in episode 2, because it was something that carried across multiple episodes. It had you looking forward to something special.
Wow, you made it all the way through. Weird. You got a crush on me or something?
What? No, I mean, it was pretty cool.
But I will talk about that later. So, why did I go in such a long digression? Because approximately half of the first episode dealt with Sean's ability, or rather inability, to survive in the wilderness while taking care of his brother. We are presented with issues of trailblazing, berries, claw marks and wildlife, making shelter, getting warmth and protection and gear, getting food, one option was to beg even, water, getting and spending money. And at the start of this episode, we are basically told, Sean and Daniel have been surviving for a month out there in the wilderness, eating a lot of ravioli. Daniel kinda controls his power now. Why was there such a long time skip? It seemed like quite an interesting story, or as I called it earlier, a plot promise, to see how brothers survived without money, how they found an abandoned house and made the decision to stay inside, even though they risked being found by the owner, how they learned to survive, what hardships must have they gone through, how Sean and Daniel embraced the fact that Daniel has supernatural power, how he started to use it and practice. Instead, we skip all of that, and the only thing we can do is imagine what it must have been like from a few entries in Sean's diary. All of those interesting bits, which seem to promise drama and adventure, are left out, and we get to play the following. Episode 2 starts 1 month after the incident in the motel, with Sean helping Daniel train his power. We discover that they have found an abandoned house in the woods where they plan to spend the winter. But because Daniel is ill, has a nasty cough, and Sean cannot get any medicine, and also because they are running out of supplies, they have to leave this place and try to seek out help from their grandparents, Claire and Stephen. We see that Daniel grew really close to Mushroom. Sean cooks ravioli, Sean plans their trip. Sean plays a game of dice with Daniel and they agree to leave the next morning. I dare to say it is a very mundane stuff. We get to know that Sean had to steal food, that Daniel was sick after drinking unboiled water, that Daniel was afraid one night and accidentally blew out one of the windows with his power. But we never get to see it or experience it, and I consider this a narrative flaw. Creators of the game should have let us experience the more interesting parts of Brothers' adventure, especially after establishing that brothers are poorly equipped for lone survival in episode 1. Your money and inventory from the first episode, for example, you had the option to steal camping gear from Hank's temper, played no real part. And here I was, imagining all the survival-related uses for a condom. Games are a visual medium. Show us the good stuff. Examples. Brothers running out of money and food would present moral dilemma to the player if he wants to be hungry or steal. Being on a street for a while could help us empathize with Cassidy later on.
No more peeing at night for Daniel. He got so scared. We're lucky he didn't blow up the house.
Also, I find the comment about Daniel's night terror, the one where he broke the window, very interesting. Why? Because it contains thrill, danger, and adventure. Follow me. Episode 1 showed claw marks on trees. If we had more time at the beginning of episode 2, maybe during some activity, say Daniel's training in the beginning, or during Sean's attempt to hunt and lay traps, we could hear ominous sound from the bushes. We could find more claw marks on the trees near the cabin, for example while foraging for wood to keep the fire going, preventing us from freezing. We could have Mushroom start barking suddenly during the night at something unseen. Later, Daniel could say he has a feeling he's being watched. That would, one night, lead Daniel to ask Sean if he'd accompany him out to pee. you could choose to go with Daniel or dismiss him. Aren't you a little too old to be afraid of the dark, Enano? Outside, in the darkness, a pair of bright eyes would appear from the nearby bush, scaring Daniel into using his power. If you didn't follow Daniel, he would blame you for not helping out. Not to mention, there's a similar scene where you can accompany Daniel at night to your tent in episode 3, or let him go alone and get a haircut. Daniel could be reminded of this situation. So, why am I going through the trouble of telling this story? Because the game has presented us with clues, with narrative promises, but never linked them together. I am only trying to pick up these loose ends and connect them. Use those individual pieces already present in the game to foreshadow an event, which actually happens later. Build up to it, create tension, so when comes the morning, when brothers pack their stuff and get ready to leave, and Mountain Lion kills Mushroom, we, players, understand what was the source of all the noise and the scratch marks. What was that night terror? We get to understand that we were stalked by a fierce predator for quite some time. As a side effect, it would add to Daniel's motivation to kill the cat, because it scared him during the night and he never left the cabin after dark as a result. But I obviously realize that killing Mushroom is a much stronger motivator. I also feel that it would be great to show Sean's despair. For example, game should have let us try to get food and medicine for Daniel and fail. Show us that we cannot fix a broken window and the house starts to get too cold. Show us that Sean cannot hunt or trap animals even though he's genuinely trying. Together with Sean, we should experience our inability to live on our own, and the Mountain Lion encounter should be the final straw forcing us to seek out Sean's grandparents. Having few elements already presented in the game connected, I mean claw marks and Daniel's scare at night, would create a small storyline within the main story. All those pieces would suddenly fit in. They would have a purpose in the story, climaxing with Mountain Lion attacking and killing Mushroom, and your decision about the fate of the predator. They wouldn't be just random objects or anecdotal stories, but instead would have a meaning. I like the moral dilemma of kill the cat versus let it go. It is one of those moments where you know there is no good choice. Either Daniel will be a worse person, or he will dislike you. The game needs more strong moments like this during episodes, and not just at their end to artificially create a so-called cliffhanger and tease us into wanting to play more. Good and fulfilling storyline will have the same effect. After making an improvised grave for Mushroom, brothers set off to seek help from Claire and Steven. And to show that I am not just a negative Nancy, let me point out that there is a little scene in the night before the brothers leave, in which Sean sits outside and smokes, and tries to lift a pebble with his mind, and fails. I like that a lot. That made me feel something for my character. This little moment tells you a lot about his feelings, about the state of his mind. It is a very cool and important scene, although inconspicuous one. I also very much like the collage of brothers traveling. Aesthetics of this game was never an issue, and this moment added to my conclusion about how I would enjoy the brothers' story the most. But if you are interested in knowing that, you will have to wait till the start of the 5th episode.
It's been a long time since I was here.
What the hell are you doing here?
Steven, watch your mouth.
Well,
Next. Upon brothers' arrival, grandparents aren't exactly sure what to do with the boys, but eventually decide to take them in. At some point during their first meeting, Claire asks Sean if he hurt the officer, and why did he run if he is innocent? Unfortunately, Sean's replies don't give any real answer, and I don't think that there is one.
I swear.
It sort of makes sense to be on the run now, after what happened at the Hank Stamper's gas station, but up to that point, Sean and Daniel would be no more than witnesses, suspects at worst, not perpetrators of a crime. The game then skips 1 week forward in time. In this instance, time skip is fairly justifiable, as we find out, from Sean's diary, that nothing of importance happened. Personally, I would have preferred to get a chance to get to know the grandparents and watch Daniel do the same. To create some sort of bond with them, which could come in handy at the end of the episode when you are forced to leave them. Instead of experience, which could eventually turn into emotion, we only get a few explanatory notes in Sean's diary. So, brothers haven't left the house and Sean is thoroughly bored. Daniel is healthy again and bonds well with Stephen, so everything is fine, but uneventful. Daniel notices that Claire keeps his mom's old room locked and is curious about what is inside. But Claire forbids the brothers from entering. Sean doesn't care about Karen and doesn't want to find out, but Daniel tries to persuade him to break in somehow. So far, we only know that Karen left the family without a trace and Sean hates her for it. I wish we the players could decide how we feel about Karen. Hate her? Are curious about her? Miss her even? It wouldn't change anything about the game, it would just give us some sense of control over the story, our character, and his feelings. Let's try to take a look at an alternative scenario. One where we get a chance to decide whether we want to go along with Daniel's plan and peek into the forbidden room early on or not. If we choose to do so, we get in. We find out there are some of Karen's old things, but we get interrupted by Claire, who gives us warning about not snooping around. Then she locks the room and hides the key. That only fuels Daniel's curiosity, and may even fuel players' curiosity because he had some say in the matter and got rewarded or punished for it. He had a choice. As it is in the game, Sean just says, "Nope, not gonna do that." And that is the end of the matter until the game decides for us that the time is right to enter. I bet I'm not the only one who feels the tangible difference in having an option to do something, even if your plans get foiled, contrasting not to have any option whatsoever. As it is, there isn't much going on. Sean has a chance to talk to Claire, reprimand Daniel after he levitates dishes, clean up a little. You are just bored, until the boys leave the house for the first time to get some old toys from the backyard shed. While the brothers are out, Daniel saves neighbor's kid Chris from falling off a tree by using his power, and they quickly become friends. Remember, Daniel hasn't met anyone his age for over a month. The day after, while grandparents are at church, Sean finds Daniel using his power in front of Chris. But before he has a chance to patronize him about it, he meets Chris's father, Charles, and agrees to go with them and with Daniel to a Christmas market to pick a Christmas tree. I have talked about Sean making decisions that I consider silly without my input, like turning on his phone before throwing it away. It felt like the writers wanted to get you to Christmas market to get identified by someone so the police could find you. That was exactly what happened. And it must have been even more frustrating to everyone who subjected all their previous choices to security. Don't call Lila, tell your brother to never use his power, don't check social media, don't touch Steven's laptop. I wish I had at least the illusion of choice. For example, let Daniel go alone and then go look after him when he isn't coming back for some time. Or forbid Daniel from going and find out he snuck out under your nose and went anyway. It could help, because so far you have been exploring the house, cleaning plates, doing laundry, playing with toy trains. A little bit of trail in between could spice things up. Having options, for example letting Daniel go alone to the market, could give the player an alternative scene at the house and increase the replayability of the game. Also, if the player didn't go and Daniel was spotted at the market, it would create additional tension between the brothers. Sean would righteously think that Daniel got them into trouble by not listening to him. Options, options, options. When the brothers arrive at the market, the player can choose to berate Daniel for using his power in front of Chris. This happens on multiple occasions in the second episode and works very well as a foreshadowing. Clearly, your attitude will have some impact. I have, however, a tiny issue with the fact that Sean was always very negative about Daniel using his power, and I felt like I couldn't make a choice. because choices were always be angry with Daniel or tell him to use it as a last resort, which are different degrees of the same thing, and one way or another made Daniel seem like a disrespectful kid who never listens to you anyway. I will talk about this more in episode 3, because that is where things culminate. For now, let me just say here that I do understand from a character perspective why would he use his power. Not only are the brothers locked up in the house for quite some time and both of them are fairly bored, but also Daniel is just a kid and his power is super cool, so he wants to explore it and show it off. Speaking of super cool, at the Christmas market, Sean meets Cassidy and you instantly know she will play some part in Sean's story. Just her visage screams adventure. She puts a stark contrast to your experience with game's characters up to this point. Most characters in Life is Strange 2 are very well written, and I wish they had more opportunities to show it. Characters like Brody, Penny, or what's his name from the 4th episode seem to have a great and interesting background and motivation, but it is barely explored in the game. In this episode, you meet Chris, who is a great kid and clearly has enough charisma and backstory to pull his own minigame. But you as a player cannot really bond with him that well because he is too young, just a kid. Steven and Claire are also good characters. One of the things I enjoy about them is how they ignore their differences. Orderly and strict Claire, and a little bit mischievous Steven. But again, you don't necessarily want to play an adventure game with supernatural elements to admire marriage or cohabitation of protagonist's grandparents. You want a little bit of adventure. So as I said, just Cassidy's visage gives a promise of that adventure. I am specifically mentioning this here because of how the game throws away that promise later. More about it at the beginning of episode 3. You discover that Cassidy, her friend Finn, and some other hippie people are on their way to California for work. Maybe this episode could use a little bit more of Finn's band of misfits to show you how cool they are and free-spirited, while you just sit there and do chores, wander around aimlessly. Maybe let the player spend some time with them, see their camp. They could reveal they know Sean is wanted by police, but are okay with it, which could give Sean motivation to seek them out once police find him at the grandparents' house, instead of meeting them later randomly.
Not really.
Getting to know the hippies earlier could give the player motivation to move, or put some tension between Sean and Daniel. Daniel could want to stay with Chris and grandparents, while Sean/the player could want to move on. So when the brothers are forced to run, it would be clear why is Daniel disappointed and frustrated with Sean. Because while he lost his friend Chris and warm home and loving grandparents, Sean gained friends and gained a sense of belonging, home, and family. It could make him feel like his tragedy was Sean's good fortune, and he could voice that sentiment to you. Now he feels alone and lost, and you just don't see it or ignore it over your budding relationships with the gang. Allowing the player to spend some time with the hippies could also have another interesting effect. If we had a proper antagonist, someone actively threatening Sean's future, it would give us the perfect moment to intersect Sean's internal and external motivation. He would have the need to leave the grandparents because he would feel the danger of being caught, but also he would feel the attraction of a life at the outskirts of society, a life of freedom. I want to make one thing clear here. I don't have any issue with how your meeting with Cassidy was handled. Quite to the contrary, I was instantly hooked, liked that very much. I'm only musing about possibilities, because not much actually happens while you are at the grandparents' house, and it takes up about a quarter of episode's length. Also, I'm trying to set some ground for my problem with episode 3. When Finn and Cassidy get ready to leave, they are confronted by a guy who gives them a bunch of shit about dogs on leashes and loitering laws, which are something I find hilarious and sad at the same time. But that would be a topic for an entirely different video. What I'm trying to say is that there we can perfectly see the disbalance in the portrayal of friendly and unfriendly characters. I know people who are just like the nagger, strictly adhering to laws as long as they serve their purpose, like invoking loitering laws to get rid of people who they don't like. One person I know has extreme disdain for people letting their dogs run without leashes in a part of a forest which technically belongs to a city district that prohibits it, and constantly gets into arguments with them. He's technically correct, but the people don't understand it or find it reasonable to apply that rule in a park and think he's just a cranky asshole. He also dislikes people with tattoos and considers them criminals. Also dislikes minorities, immigrants, and most of un-European inhabitants, with an exception to Japanese people for some reason. Don't ask. At the same time, people looking like Finn and Cassidy who aren't responsible enough to put a leash or a muzzle on their dog in places that require it, usually aren't responsible enough to properly train their dogs either. So in a real-life situation, I can understand why people around them would be concerned. But the game presents it only from a singular point of view, making the guy look like an asshole and allows you to punish him for only adhering to rules of society he lives in. He didn't make them up, he only knows there are the rules, and he was taught that the rules must be followed.
Nice.
Come on!
Finn's and Cassidy's approach is fuck the rules, but they are portrayed like martyrs, and the game doesn't allow you to think that they might have been in the wrong this time.
Ready to go?
Even if you pick the do-nothing option, Sean still sides with the hippies, instead trying to explain the situation to his brother from both perspectives. I will come back to this later, specifically in episode 4. So, after meeting Cassidy and Finn, brothers go back home. You get a brief chance to talk to Charles, Chris's father. I really feel pity that Chris's story was left unresolved, especially since Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit set it up so well, showed there was a good drama to be explored, and presented the two households as a functional community, where Claire was worried about Chris and Charles and tried to help, possibly reflecting her own failure in keeping her family from falling apart. It seemed like a good plotline to help fix Chris's family after losing yours, or to help Sean and Danielle deal with their loss after seeing how other people are dealing with theirs. There could even be an interesting dilemma for the player to disrespect grandparents' ban on leaving the house in order to help Chris and his relationship with Charles. You are breaking the rules and risk being spotted and reported to authorities for a good cause. Or a different example. At the beginning of episode 1, Esteban asks Sean to help him fix a car, right? You should be able to choose whether you want to help him or not. If not, Sean will just wander around the house and pick up food and money for the party. As a result, brothers won't be hungry later in the woods and will be able to buy food at Hank Stamper's gas station. If the player decides to help Esteban, Sean will not have enough time to prepare his backpack before the incident, and as a result, the brothers will be hungry in the woods and will be forced to beg or steal at the gas station, attracting Hank's attention. However, Sean will learn something about fixing cars. In the second episode, after meeting Chris and Charles, you will discover that Chris desperately wants to go to the Christmas market, but cannot because Charles's car is broken, and Charles, struggling to find energy and motivation to do anything, simply haven't had it fixed. Sean will then be able to help Charles out and fix the car for him, allowing everyone to go. At the Christmas market, Charles will see how happy Chris is with Danielle, contrasting how sad and quiet he is at home with him, and it might be the kick in the butt he needs to start getting his life back together. This gives you control over the course of the plot. It is a reward for spending time with Sean's father. This moves Sean from the position of a passive observer into the driver's seat while making the player feel like they have accomplished something. That would, however, require that creators write their entire story in advance, that they plan plotlines and tie events together across the game. It is hard to achieve when you write your story from episode to episode. I genuinely wonder why resolving Chris's and Charles's relationship wasn't involved in the game. You skip right over it with a few lines of dialogue. What point was then to Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit? Isn't the reason to play games to go on an adventure? To be able to fix issues people cannot easily fix? To be a hero? to help out.
We are not your usual
Instead,
happy.
every situation goes right over Sean's head.
Things haven't
If I wanted to be frustrated and overwhelmed with reality, I wouldn't resort to playing video games. Isn't it always great to have Snooping Kid uncover some sort of plot and then fix it? We see this in stories over and over again, and it is always satisfying.
All ties with her parents, too.
Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit set up Chris's problem really well, but Life is Strange 2 skips right over it.
Yeah, we should
Like it's not our character's problem.
don't keep them waiting.
And I am a little worried that this approach may unintentionally suggest to players to be indifferent, to focus only on their path, on their quest, and not bother themselves with other people's problems. This way we never get closure to Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit.
See you later, Super Wolf.
That is a very strange way to tell a story. It's not unique, but I dare to say inappropriate for this type of video game. Wasn't Life is Strange about family ties and resolving relationships? About the value of the relationship between characters? So I want to appeal to all storytellers out there. If you set up a situation where there is potential for characters to be improved, include a payoff, make them heroes. And if not, make the story depressive, show that some problems cannot be solved.
It's been a struggle.
If the goal is letting us see Chris's father, Charles, become abusive drunk, that is okay too. But teasing us with rich and promising storyline and then forgetting about it is a narrative sin.
I'm just...
Hello? Hello?
Back to the story.
I want to go check.
Your elders are still at the church, and Daniel wants to use the opportunity to check out his mother's room, and Sean just sort of goes with it.
Daniel.
He gives up.
Claire.
I give up too.
Freak out if they know we
Once again, the player is not allowed to have any say in this.
Total stealth.
Where is the interactivity?
Fuck it.
You had a say in whether you want to fix a crooked painting on the wall, or repair a ship in a bottle, or lift a rock in the aquarium to see the elusive fish, but not about breaking one of the ground rules, even though Claire makes a point about it earlier in the episode? Breaking a rule made by the character who takes care of you and provides you with everything you need? Do you see why I have issues with Sean's character? He is so impertinent. Things happen quickly after this. Brothers get into Karen's room, find out that she recently sent a letter asking her parents to help her children. Daniel wants to contact her, Sean doesn't. Claire and Steven get you in the room, of course, and Claire argues with the brothers. Steven leaves the room, argument with Claire gets heated, but interrupted by cupboard falling on Steven. As the brothers help him, Sheriff appears, knocks on the door, and says the brothers were spotted at the Christmas market. While grandparents cover for them, the brothers pack their stuff and run away. The episode ends with them hopping on to a passing-by freight train. Again, I felt like I had no say in what was going to happen. Sean decided to go to the Christmas market, and Sean decided to go into Karen's room. Was I needed for any of that? What if all of that was just an animation? Just a movie? We get to explore Claire's and Steven's room and get to know something more about them, and it is interesting, but ultimately kind of pointless given we will never see them again. When brothers look for a way to break into Karen's room, Daniel makes it clear he can open the locked door using his power. It doesn't seem it would be too much trouble to give player choices. For example, not to help Daniel gain access to Karen's room, or straight up forbid him, only to find out that Daniel broke in on his own. It can be Daniel presenting Sean with Karen's letter. As a result, the final argument with Claire can take place in a different room, and maybe the player could even side with Claire and scold Daniel, souring their relationship just before the police arrive. When playing an interactive game, you want options for replayability and variability. Your actions should bring different results, reward you or punish you with alternative scenes, adding scenes or leaving them out as a consequence. Small differences can go a long way for players' experience.